Coming up.
So there are four main contributors to disease. This is according to the Cleveland Clinic. It's parasites, number one, pretty much mostly foodborne. You have bacteria, which can be foodborne and airborne, right? Also, it could be just skin contact. You have viruses, right? As we learn about through COVID, virus contamination mostly comes through the air transmission. So that's going to be an environmental issue there. And then you have fungi as the final thing, which obviously mold is part of fungi. And so when we look at that, really three of the four things, viruses, bacteria, and fungi here, we can get in our own homes or in indoor spaces. And we're most likely to get them in indoor spaces. And so I think when air quality really should be a lot higher at the forefront than it currently is.
Okay, Kimmy and Megan, why are you talking about mold? What's the point of this episode? The point is that some people are very sensitive to mold. Mm-hmm. And there's even people that genetically cannot handle mold. Their body may not be able to fight it.
Is it about location where you live? Is it about when your home was built? Is it about materials? How do we know that the fungus is among us?
Signs and symptoms of mold illness, and then maybe show us some pictures of what it could look like.
Brain fog, chronic fatigue. These are probably the top two things that seem to have a common denominator amongst everyone I talk to. Skin rashes, a big thing, skin issues, weight loss, weight gain. I know it's weird, but it happens both ways. We have autoimmune deficiency.
We have a special offer for our Munch Bunch listeners. To book a virtual consult with Megan, she's offering a discount of $25 off. Just email her, Megan, at nwmyofunctionaltherapy.com or through her website, www.orofacial-myology.com. To book a virtual consult with Kimmy for the $25 off, email her mouthmusclememory@outlook.com or through the website, www.mouthmusclememory.com. Now on to the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Munch Bunch podcast. I am your co-host, Megan Van Noy, with my Mayo bestie and real life bestie, Kimmy Nishimoto. We are so excited, you guys. Today we have an awesome guest joining us. Perfect time of year to, at least in the Portland area where it's all damp and dreary. And we're talking about mold today, you guys. So we have the mold medic, Michael Rubino, on with us, and we are going to talk all about mold and mold sickness and what to do about it, how to help your home. Michael is the author of the Mold Medic, which is an expert's guide on mold removal. So we're going to give him the floor in just a second, but before we do, Kimmy, let's pull our affirmator for the day.
Okay. Michael, since you're our guest, I will flip through cards and you just tell me when to stop.
Fantastic. That sounds exciting. And let's stop there.
Okay. Open-heartedness. And we have this little bookworm.
Cute.
I know that life and the people living in it can be an absolute bummer sometimes. But I promise not to let unhappy chapters make me jaded. If I let negative experiences turn me sour, then the jerks win. So I'll move on with an open and hopeful heart, if only because I hate losing to jerks.
There we go. I love it. Beautiful. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about you, your background, how you got into mold.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Well, my name is Michael Rubino. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, and I love the affirmation for this week. That sounds great. And by the way, I know I don't live in Portland, so I can't be your real life bestie, but hopefully we become besties, after this episode here. I got into the industry since my dad was a restoration contractor since I'm about 5. I've just been around construction my entire life. Primarily I saw a lot of fire restoration being done, but of course, fires get put out with water and it creates this whole biological soup inside people's homes. And so that's always a big part of it. But really, actually, it was after Hurricane Sandy. I'm in my mid 20s. I start noticing a pattern of people getting sick. This was a new concept to me before. Like many people in society, they don't realize that there's stuff out there smaller than what you can even see that can harm you, like viruses and bacteria and mold, right? And so, as I started to do a deeper dive into, how do I help people through this? I realized there's been a lot of missing information just in the remediation community in and of itself. That really was missing the boat on how this stuff does affect people and what we need to do about it. And so that's spun a 10-year journey into me figuring that out, creating processes, creating a company around solving that problem, which led to me writing the book to kind of talk about all these discoveries and define, my process and how do you really look at the home and remediate the home properly when you need to. But I think, overall, looking forward, my goal is to really make sure that everyone creates more of an importance around air quality so that they're not an adverse effect of it if they have poor air quality. And I've seen this in so many cases that, at this point, I'm just trying to shout from every rooftop that'll have me. So yeah, that's kind of my story there.
We'll have you. Shout away.
Fantastic. Great.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it was interesting because I do think that's something, that people don't necessarily always think about. Like a lot of times people just kind of think mold is there, but then when things happen to your home and, when you said biological soup, I was like, ew, what a visual, but like so true. Right. And then a lot of times, people don't know what to do with it. They don't know for sure that it's like completely out of their home. It's almost sometimes it feels like mold begets mold. It's like,
yeah.
How do you stop it? So I love that you kind of found this, passion from just seeing all the things that you ran into growing up. So what do you feel like? Is it about location where you live? Is it about when your home was built? Is it about materials? How do we know that like the fungus is among us?
Well, it's a great question. I think there's always variables, no matter what it is in life that you're trying to do. Definitely where you live plays a part in it, right? Because if you live in a humid area like Florida, for example, you're going to want to have a lot of dehumidification strategies in place, right? Now, if you live in a dry climate like Arizona, for example, you're probably going to have the reverse problem where you're going to want to add humidity, right? But not too much because you reach a certain threshold and mold's very easy to grow there. We also have, obviously, the way the home is built. I mean, we use various building materials from metal to concrete to wood. And you have to understand, the consequences of using such building materials. Like for metal, everyone's like, oh, we'll just use metal, no problem. Great. Well, metal can condensate, right? And so now we have to make sure it's well insulated if we're going to use metal. If we use wood, right, then we have to have various layers of building materials that prevent water from impacting the wood and then impacting the insulation and drywall on the other side. Cement is also semi-porous, just like wood. So it also has its challenges in making sure that there's proper layers of waterproofing material. I think, with that all said and done, where we see the biggest problems is when people use materials that is fine to use, but they didn't use it in the right context to make sure that as water does migrate in, it's got a path to travel back out and not inside of our homes. And I think the real important part of this too is why is it so important? Well, in 1970s, when we had Richard Nixon as president, we really started to go down this path of energy efficiency. And we've only, really expanded on that path as the decades have gone on. And when we went down that path, we forgot about one of the consequences of that path. And that's, well, if we're trying to keep energy really efficient, what do? Well, we try to keep energy from escaping. So what do? We build tighter homes. Well, with tighter homes, less air exchange, the more problems we have indoors, it magnifies those problems because there's not enough air exchange to dilute those problems. So that means that every breath that we take, we're breathing a lot more in than we were in, 50s, 60s, et cetera. And so as we look at that, that's why this has become such a larger problem that actually continues to get worse, because we still haven't, really come to this awareness and have decided that, hey, if we're going to have energy efficiency, we need to counteract that with making sure that we're waterproofing buildings better. And we need some sort of air exchange, right, to prevent this from happening. Otherwise, even if we don't have a mold problem or a bacteria problem, and we use chemicals and stuff like that in our home, even those too, is those off gas, and VOCs is those off gas. And, heck, we got to buy furniture, and that can contain formaldehyde, which will also dissipate. We're going to be breathing in more of that than we normally would. So it's really just mapping this out and putting a plan together to help curtail this, which we really haven't done because, there's not that many people that are concerned about it, and we need more concern here.
I have no idea what a sump pump is. I'll be honest with you guys.
Ooh, I have one in my house.
I do remember we had a mold issue in my house, and my parents were always like, oh, the sump pump is leaking again. And there would be water all over the front yard. Is a sump pump related to mold issue? I'm like, I don't know.
All right. Well, what a sump pump does is essentially is it usually installed in a wet area so that as water does migrate in, it pumps it out, right? And so we might have sump pumps in our basements or crawl spaces, right? We also may want to have a dehumidifier installed in our home, and we'll use a sump pump to then drain the water away from the house. And yes, they're pumps. They plug into an outlet. They pump water out. It's a motor. And so motors break, things break. We have to replace those things. And what happens if it's failing, right? The water pump has a pit, right? And as that water starts to elevate and the pump's not pumping it out, guess what? It spills over and leaks. So that's the phenomenon that occurred that you're explaining here in this scenario. And essentially, that can be a problem, of course, because too much water, but having a sump pump also can be a blessing when you have severe water issues with the property that you need to solve. And so it's really like anything else. If we install a sump pump, we have to check it and maintain it. Just like when we install a roof on our house, we got to check it and maintain it. So it's no real difficulty there, but I think we just need to be more mindful of checking these things than we currently are, because most people, human nature, we don't really look at anything until we know it's a problem, right? And so more preventative action with our homes is going to pay itself in dividends for sure.
And what would be the most common cause of mold that you see? Is it the hurricanes, or you were mentioning the fire, if there's a home fire? What other kind of events could be the impetus for the mold?
Yeah, I think we know about these big events. That's pretty self-explanatory. But what other places do I see mold grow often, and what's the cause of it? Leaking plumbing devices all the time. Improperly waterproof showers, right? So I just bought a house. We're remediating it right now, so I can eventually one day move in there. That day feels like forever away at this point because we keep finding more problems. But one of the interesting things that I see a lot in my clients that I experience in my own home is when they built this shower, and I would imagine this shower was probably done in the early 2000s. They essentially put cement board up, then they tiled on top of the cement board, right? And that those were two good steps to take, but they're missing a very vital third step, is they didn't have any waterproofing membrane that the tile would go on top of, right? So essentially they should have waterproofed the top of the cement board so that if water gets behind the tile, which by the way, it always will, because grout is semi-porous, then you wouldn't have this situation where water would constantly be leaking into that area, et cetera, et cetera. What's crazy about this whole scenario is that shower was leaking since it was probably done in the 2000s. And lo and behold, the floor was rotted so much so that we actually had to replace the structure of the floor because there were holes in the floor. It was mind boggling how, someone didn't fall through there with the weight of the tile and all that stuff. It rotted walls, walls had to be rebuilt. There was a lot of damage that this thing caused. And there's what is going to be our kids' playroom right below that bathroom. and that whole ceiling was rotted too from underneath. So, it created a lot of damage off this one stupid shower just because they didn't waterproof it. And so I can't tell you how many bathrooms built in the 90s and 2000s that are this way, because really Red Guard and some of these other waterproofing products for showers really didn't start to come out until, sometime around the 2005 plus era. So a lot of showers built previous to 2005 have been built with that. And so you get a lot of leaking showers from that. I've also seen, vanities, sinks, toilets leak. That happens. Problems in the attic and basements and crawl spaces tend to be the largest surface areas inside of a home that if they have a problem, they're going to create a lot of impact. We see this time and time again with poor ventilation in an attic, not allowing that moisture borne air to escape. We also have roof leaks, right? Basements and crawl spaces, they're subgrade, so you're constantly prone to water intrusion from just being below ground.
Yeah.
Without having good waterproofing and dehumidification strategies to extract the water out of the air, once it reaches 60% relative humidity or more, you're allowing this environment where mold and bacteria can thrive. And so, having these countermeasures in place is something that people really didn't address, even to this day, aren't addressing as much as they should. And that's going to provide you a better kind of foundation. And then, of course, you have a problem. The HVAC system is very vulnerable to get contaminated because the HVAC system has what's something called a coil that constantly condensates, which means it's wet, which means that mold and bacteria and viruses and toxins love it. And so we start to get into this scenario where problems, small problems turn into big problems pretty quick if they're recirculating and starting to grow in the HVAC as well. So what do you do about it? You fix it up, you clean it, you prevent it from happening again, you clean the HVAC, you clean the home of all the particles and toxins. I know I make it sound so easy, right? But that's the simplicity of what really needs to be done and in that sequence. And I think for most people, when looking at this, like everyone that I talk to, it's like, I got to deal with 10 years worth of problems here in one short order. And it's a lot, right? I mean, that stuff can cost and add up quickly. So, I think how do we solve this problem? Well, we become more aware as a society. We are more on top of little things as they are little things before they become big things. And we do things step by step so that we're not, having to kind of smush together 10 years worth of projects in one short project here, which of course always makes it, a financial barrier.
Mm-hmm. When you were talking about HVAC, I thought about my childhood again. We had a swamp cooler. Are swamp coolers more prone to mold?
Are swamp coolers more prone to mold? I think really anything that's changing the pressure of the air, right? So like, swamp coolers, you have whole house fans too, which I don't know if you guys have ever seen or come across, where basically you turn on a switch and it instantly releases all of the air in the house and pushes it up and out of the house, which is another, kind of like a swamp cooler strategy where you're using minimal electricity to kind of cool the air, if you will. But anything that changes the airflow, you have to always look at what's that doing to the house, right? Because with this whole house fan, for example, you're basically putting the house under negative pressure. So you're going to be pulling all of this air from interstitial cavities, which is going to migrate from outside inside. And that's not necessarily a problem. But if you have, several mold issues inside your house, for example, that might be hidden behind a wall, is going to be pulling that from behind the wall, in front of the wall more aggressively, which is going to impact the air that you breathe. And so, it's just looking at some of these things as a risk factor. I think the best systems that you can have today, and this changes all the time. 10 years ago was something else, but I think a central AC system is probably one of the best systems that you can have today, mainly because there's technology out there where you can filter out tiny particles like mold and bacteria and toxins, even some viruses, from getting into the unit. And if you can do that, what you're actually doing is you're turning your unit into an air purifier. and you're also protecting the investment of the HVAC so that it's not redistributing the stuff all over the house. And of course, it's not going to start growing on the coil because you're preventing it from getting to the coil. And so I think, it's really one of the only technologies currently that have such great filtration capabilities that you can do if you know what to look for and get the right products, et cetera. But everything else has this limitations, like mini splits, for example.
I'm
That's
glad
so
you
cool.
mentioned the central air, because I was curious about that. This summer we went to Italy and it was like almost 100 degrees. You walk outside and you're just drenched in sweat. Inside the hotel, we had an air conditioning unit, those like wall units, and it was so hot and so humid in Sicily that it was just all that condensing water from the AC was just dripping. And at nighttime, I put a little water bottle underneath the AC unit so it wouldn't leak all over the floor. I'd filled up an entire 2 liter of water just dripping from the AC. So that makes a lot of sense to my brain.
Yeah. Oh, that's wild. Well, and I'm thinking about like some of these homes, like you're talking about taking that extra step, especially kind of in like Portland, Seattle, these big areas where like they're throwing up a lot of homes really quickly and new developments, and they're just like, cheapest things possible, trying to just put them up, put them up, put them up. I wonder how many of these homes that are, seemingly like look gorgeous and really nice, how many have like took shortcuts and now are going to have these mold issues over the years.
Way too many. I mean, one of the biggest problems I see in the building community today is when they deliver the lumber, they're supposed to elevate it out of the soil, wrap it, leave both ends open for ventilation. It's in the guides of how to install truss frame construction. But I don't know if people don't read the guides or just don't think it's that big of a deal. Because if you drive around America, Seattle, Portland, I've seen the same thing in Tampa. You'll find lumber all strung over the soil. And what's really bad about that is mold and bacteria are abundant in the soil, right? And so the other thing is kind of going back to like elementary science class here. If you got trapped moisture, right, you leave a wet sponge on a countertop, that moisture is going to stay wet underneath underneath that sponge far longer than around it, right? Because air helps things dry. Well, if the wood's smushed into the soil, right, it's going to trap the moisture between the soil and the lumber. It's going to be able to transfer mold from the soil to the lumber, bacteria from the soil to the lumber. And now we have this situation where we're building homes and it's already moldy from day one before it's even freaking built. And then, the question becomes obviously, well, it's only going to get worse too as more rain and water adds to it once you have a growth issue there, where that wouldn't be the case. If it was not in the soil and then built, then it would be fine because it would be drying a lot quicker than if it's trapped moisture there. So I think, that's one simple thing we can do in the building community to really help out. But unfortunately, this is kind of the things that happen and we have to learn our lessons.
Right.
Interesting.
We want to introduce the Spot for Tots course, a parent's guide for toddlers ages 2 to 5 for Mini Mayo. We have Megan and Kimmy going over nasal hygiene, myofunctional exercises, breathing exercises, tongue tie healing protocols, and then we have Jenny June going over sleep hygiene and Kelsey Baker going over feeding therapy and body work. The course is $297 and the link will be in the description.
So you guys are probably wondering, like, okay, Kimmy and Megan, like, why are you talking about mold? What's the point of this episode? The point is that some people are very sensitive to mold. And there's even people that genetically cannot handle mold. Like, their body may not be able to fight it. I know a family where mom and the kids have that gene. Dad does not. They've been in the same old house. Dad was fine. Kids and mom were sick. So, will you talk to us about signs and symptoms of mold illness, and then maybe show us some pictures of like what it could look like?
I'd be happy to. I want to kick it off with some statistics just to blow people's minds a bit. First off, it's important to understand when we're looking at health and what we want to do to protect our health, what makes something unhealthy, right? So there are four main contributors to disease. This is according to the Cleveland Clinic. It's parasites, number one, pretty much mostly foodborne. You have bacteria, which can be foodborne and airborne, right? Also, it could be just skin contact. You have viruses, right? As we learn about through COVID, virus contamination mostly comes through the air transmission. So that's going to be an environmental issue there. And then you have fungi as the final thing, which obviously mold is part of fungi. And so when we look at that, really three of the four things, viruses, bacteria, and fungi here, we can get in our own homes or in indoor spaces. And we're most likely to get them in indoor spaces. And so I think when air quality really should be a lot higher at the forefront than it currently is, because most of these things we're going to get through our environment. And so I want to drive that point home because hopefully that'll drive the importance of the episode here. We also have another interesting statistic, not sure if it's related or not, but I'd certainly love to see more data on this. And it's over 50% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition, right? So we talked about what creates disease leading to chronic conditions, right? And now we realize that 50% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. I wonder what that number could be if we paid more attention to air quality worldwide, right? So I start off with that. When we talk about air quality and all this other stuff, one last statistic to mention is, according to the American Lung Association, any particle smaller than 10 microns has the greatest health risk because at that size, right, it bypasses the self-defense mechanisms of the body, immediately enters the bloodstream. What's smaller than 10 microns? Mold, bacteria, viruses. So it's kind of important to kind of tie all that together because it makes a lot of sense. When we talk about mold illness, it shows up differently in many different people. I've had the pleasure just in the last year of making contact with over 1,000 different clients and patients, and learning about them and doing my best to help people, wherever their means are and whatever situation they're going through. I'm seeing so many different categories of illness and so many different, things show up in people, but, brain fog, chronic fatigue, these are probably the top two things that seem to have a common denominator amongst everyone I talk to. Skin rashes, a big thing, skin issues, weight loss, weight gain. I know it's weird, but it happens both ways. We have autoimmune deficiencies for sure that seem to be exacerbated in these unhealthy environments. We have inflammation as a big thing, which, obviously can be so many different things, but it seems to be much worse when your body's dealing with all these particles and toxins that it needs to remove. And I do have some pictures here to kind of diagram out some of the other things. Should I share my screen here?
Yeah, we would love that. I think
Fantastic.
that's a really interesting thing that we wanted to talk to you about, because the brain fog and the fatigue also overlap with what Megan and I do. It's just teaching people how to nose breathe, helping them with their sleep quality so they have less brain fog and fatigue. But sometimes you run into that barrier. What if you have mold illness and you have that chronic sinus issues? Everything that we do is dependent on that nose being open, getting the nitric oxide, having that clear nasal pathway. So this is fascinating to us.
I mean, what if it's all connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I always kind of harp on, is because if it's all connected, I mean, how will we ever get ahead in life if we're not paying more attention to air quality, to improve our sinuses, to improve the ability to sleep, to reduce the inflammation, right? That leads to these whole hosts of things. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to pretend that it's all linked, but I do like to ask questions such as what if? And me asking myself what if in everything that I've done in life has led to so many great discoveries that I've made, which has helped a lot of people. And so, it's not my horse in that race. I have no expertise in that field. However, if I ask what if enough times, somebody will help us out and start to do the work on the research side of things. And I'm going to pull up this picture here now to kind of get this party started on, some of the things. And can you see that?
Yes.
Make it bigger here. All right, so this is a diagram of the typical things that you would see with mold, right? So it's itchy ears, buzzing sound, ringing ears, things of that nature, red, itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, congestion, runny nose, itchy or sore throat, postnasal drip, cough. We talked about brain fog, chronic fatigue, cognitive impairment, the work that Dr. Bredeson's doing on inhalational Alzheimer's has been phenomenal, seeing how environmental toxins that get into the body can lead to the early onset of dementia, and something that he's coined inhalational Alzheimer's. Cognitive impairment, I think, is a really profound discovery, because it seems to me that there's no end in sight into the possibilities that this could be either causing or exacerbating. Certainly a lot more research is done. Some interesting things that I found in the media lately. This is somebody's skin reaction to, I think it was a mold exposure that they were exposed to it in a school. This was over in Europe, I believe. And, this is kind of her taking a picture of her face here of a massive breakout, obviously. And, if you read the article, there was a whole other host of symptoms she was experiencing. But, from a visual perspective, you can see obviously that there's some reaction here that is apparent. And as far as she's claiming that before that she had no skin issues, and after the exposure she has skin issues. So, it's interesting to see, also because sometimes people don't have a visual of some of the things that can become apparent based upon our skin. I'm going to stop sharing here and then open up another one.
And I think while you're opening that, I think too, a lot of times, you see some of these skin reactions, or you see some of these other like signs and symptoms, and it's not always like mold doesn't always get kind of thrown into the like mix of what could be going on. So I think it's so great that you're talking about bacteria, virus, and mold. We got to look at everything. I think a lot of people probably get misdiagnosed, or it doesn't even come into the purview.
I would just think like, oh, I have acne, like, oh, I must be hormonal and breaking out.
Yeah, or allergic reaction to something.
Yeah, and look, and obviously, these things can happen when you have an allergic reaction. They can happen through the hormonal changes, right? But I think our minds always go there as like the first thing. And, we don't often look at our environment, and it's important just to know all the different variables, right? Because, if I have a reaction like this, what am I doing? I'm probably going on WebMD and I'm like, all right, good. So either I have eczema or I'm dying, one or the other, right? And so, there's no in between. And, for some people, right, when you're looking up what is going on, what's really the end result? You want to find out an answer to something so that at the end of the day, you can do something about it. And so for so many people, if air quality is not on their radar, right, they're going to be chasing all these other things, spending all this time and money on other solutions that don't work. And, at the end of the day, if this was it all along, you could have ruled this out, you could have handled this and been moved on by now. And so I think for a lot of people, it's just having the information that, like this photo can be caused due to poor air quality, due to mold or bacteria. I mean, that's great to know, right? It's not great to experience, of course, but it's great to know so that you can remove this experience as quickly as possible. And I think, one of the biggest things for me and why I do what I do is I've just seen so many people struggle. And I kind of am like an empath of myself. I mean, there's times I'll have a consult with somebody and I'm like shaken to my core of listening to their experience and feeling that pain and emotion. And, times 1,000 times, 10 years. I mean, I wasn't seeing or talking to 1,000 people earlier on in my career, but you get the gist of it. It's a lot of people, and you start to experience what they're experiencing. It is heartbreaking. And all they needed. Like when you listen to everybody's story, it's like, I've been struggling for 4 years, 5 years, if that could be so much shorter, right? It's so much life to get back.
These people often feel kind of crappy too. They're just always tired, or they get sick really easily or frequently. And I think it's interesting, the last picture that you showed of like the nose, all those symptoms are classic like seasonal allergies or environmental allergies.
That's what I was thinking about. Yeah.
And I got one more of hives, and I'll be frank, I don't see hives a lot, but I have seen them. And this is a photo of hives, again, allegedly from mold exposure. I don't have all the data to confirm or deny, but this is a photo taken. And there's one case that always kind of stuck with me. It was a client in Brooklyn a couple of years ago now that had like probably one of the highest levels of mycotoxins that I've seen inside their home by testing the dust. Had pretty severe levels of mold. It was like a company screwed something into their ceiling, hit a pipe that was leaking for a long time. They didn't know. And I mean, the whole place basically had to be taken back down and rebuilt. But she had, like these severe skin rashes and lesions all over her body. And, it's really interesting how you see these things develop differently from person to person. But it's important to kind of look at this and say, well, I want people to know this so they can start to rule out if air quality is a problem. And I think that's really important. And, when you read my book, I think one of the things you'll discover is the fact that air quality, it's not as linear as we would like. The industry itself is very archaic. They believe that air quality means if you take a sample in the center of the room and it comes back fine, that's good air quality. And, when we understand the limitations of testing and how that test really is only picking up about a 3-foot radius. Our room's a lot bigger than a 3-foot radius. And so we have the potential to miss things. More likely, if you test closer to exterior walls, if you test, walls closer to walls that have plumbing on them, you'll have a lot more accurate information as to where, if there are any leaks, where they could be and what the result of those leaks could be. And it's just getting people into the frame of mind of not only empowering them with the education to go and do something about it, but also do the right thing about it. And so that's been one of the challenges that I've seen over the years, and why I wrote the book on that.
What are like some of the practical things, like we're talking about, people who've had like, my house was built in like 1920. And they've done updates and stuff to it. But we were even talking about how like current homes are built sometimes, or, you're moving into your home and you're dealing with like 10 years or more of damage. What are some practical things that people can do in their home, like to protect against mold, to kind of remediate, again, some of these smaller problems before they become bigger problems? What are some practical things people can do?
Yeah, I think, we have to kind of reframe our minds around, we want to do within our means to create a healthy home, right? And so what a lot of people do is they kind of go down this path of like, all right, I probably have mold, let me get a mold inspector, and they kind of do that archaic process we just described. Or maybe they find some issues and they call like a mold remediation company to come in and remove some mold. But there's so much more about creating a healthy environment than that, right? We have to look at accumulation of dust as a really big endeavor here, because when you have mold or you have bacteria or viruses or what have you, right, that are traversing across your house, they're settling in your dust. That's how they continue to travel and migrate. And when they settle with your dust, they continuously recirculate until that dust is removed. And dust doesn't disappear, right? We've all climbed on our kitchen cabinets and seen like 10 years worth of dust up there and like, holy crap, I better clean this. So it doesn't remove on its own, right?
Right.
And so it stays with us until we do physically remove it. And so we let a lot of stuff accumulate in our environment, and having a plan to having a cleaning plan that we develop routinely, and also, once a year doing like a deep dive cleaning all the stuff we might not always clean all the time. But also with that being said, is my stuff cleanable, right? Because if we have a lot of carpets are not really that cleanable unless you get one of those machine washable ones, or you can throw right in the laundry. If they're installed and they're wall to wall carpets, even worse, because the only time you could ever clean them is getting like a Stanley steamer cleaning company over to do that. And they never really fully get clean, right? And so it's kind of starting to reframe around what can I clean, how can I clean it, and buying things more cleanable than we have in the past. And starting to look at that type of creating a lifestyle around it, right? Protecting our HVAC, filtering our HVAC, air purifiers, the whole nine. So it's a lot more than just, getting the guy out to remove some mold in the wall. That's not very likely to make you feel better. It's definitely going to help it create less particles and toxins, which over time will make you feel better. But there's other things that we need to consider with creating a healthy environment.
What's your opinion on, like, if you're in a high humidity area like Florida or like the Bay Area of California, for example, where it's very high humidity? Do you like dehumidifiers? Do you like air purifiers? Do you find that that's helpful?
Yeah, it's making sure your HVAC systems are appropriately sized, because obviously they're designed to remove humidity as well. That's what that coil is there for, and that's what that drip pan's for, to pull all that moisture out and drain it outside. When you see that HVAC systems aren't appropriately sized, you see a lot of problems with humidity there. That whole design is important, but sometimes you need a little bit of help anyway, and you install a standalone dehumidifier to control the humidity. If you live in a high humidity area, it's really important that you understand 60% relative humidity or more allows an environment to grow. And so if we keep it below, I wouldn't keep it at 59%. I don't like to live on the edge that much. I'm trying to keep it between like 45 and 50%. Because too dry obviously creates a lot of other issues like dry skin, cracked skin, but also drying and cracking of wood substrates in your home, which isn't good either. So you really want to have a nice sweet spot. It is very possible. I mean, I live in Florida, right? And so I deal with it. It's something that is, it's if you know it and you deal with it, it doesn't become a problem. It's if you don't know and you let it become a problem, then it's very likely to become one.
Interesting.
That's crazy. Oh, yeah. It's so crazy just to think, like, I already said this earlier. I don't want to like repeat the same joke, but like the fungus is among us, like, and just trying to stay on top of it and be able to address it. I like that there are some like practical, like attainable things to do to like help remediate. And then obviously, like if there's bigger projects, if there's more, people can call you, right? So if somebody had a big mold problem, would they get in contact with you? What would it look like working with you?
Well, if somebody has a big mold problem, for their sake, I would appreciate if they got in contact with me so that I can at least guide them down the right path.
Yeah.
I do have a company that does remediation. I would say really it's not just remediation. They kind of are. Right. They have a process to create a healthy environment within your means, right? We have to work within people's means to be able to create as much impact for them as we can. And so, I love that side of things. But other than that too, I personally consult with a lot of folks too, even people that don't hire, the company to create a healthy environment for one reason or another, to just help guide them, right? Because I think a lot of people throw money at things to solve a problem, but if you don't actually solve that problem, then you've wasted money, right? And so I think from that perspective, my goal there is to try to help, until I can figure out a way to standardize it so that everyone that's in this industry is kind of operating under the same guidance and principles. Right now it's just, at least if I give people roadmaps to things and they can do what they need to do and make sure that it's done properly. But other than that, I mean, that's kind of how I operate at the current time of working with me.
Mm-hmm. And where is your company located? What is your contact? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so HomeCleanse is a nationwide company. It goes all over 50 states to help people. It's a very, step-by-step process. It's kind of like when you hire an architect and you're ready to build a home. It's like you get an architect and you get an engineer and you go through these various steps, and all of a sudden you got a plan, you're ready to go. We've kind of mimicked that process in and of itself, in terms of, all right, we need the right data, like, because we can't understand what's creating the most impact if we don't have the data. And so we get the right data, then we put together a plan of what it's going to take to essentially improve that data, and make sure that all the right steps are done in place. Because if you do things out of sequence, you make more of a mess for yourself, and that leads to more costs, of course, too. And so, then it's a big planning step, and then you go ahead and execute on that plan. And so I think, that's in a nutshell how that process works. You go to homecleanse.com, you can go on and fill out, information and start to work on that result. But it's not like, the average national company where you're like, hey, I have some mold or I have a leak, come and fix it. Like, that's not what we do. We scientifically create healthy environments and then guarantee behind the scientific evidence of that. And
Love
that's
it.
our ready, aim, fire process.
I love it. I love it. So, of course, you guys, we're going to link all these contacts into this episode. I know I mentioned it at the beginning, but you can find Michael on Instagram at the Michael Rubino, and he is the author of The Mold Medic. So grab that book. Reach out for consults. Reach out if you need a little help in your home with HomeCleanse. It's been so awesome to have you on today and learn even more about how mold can really form, and how it really is a contributor to, some of these chronic illnesses. And I think it'll open up some eyes, and, especially for those of our listeners who have been feeling some of these things, but haven't gone down this path yet. Even if we're ruling things out, we need to take into account everything that can contribute. So if you guys want to find us on social media, you know how to do it if you've been a listener for long enough. But I will remind you, you can find Kimmy at Mouth Muscle Memory. You can find myself at NWMFT. You can find us both at the Munch Bunch Mayo podcast, on YouTube, and then also on Instagram. So happy Munchy Monday. Michael, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you guys all soon.
Perfect. Thank you.